Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You'd never think it, but filmmaking and real estate actually have a fair bit in common because it's all about location, 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 baby. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And I mean, if you like how we do things around here, I'm guessing you do because you're here, you're listening. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically anywhere you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. Plus, don't hesitate to follow us on social media if you don't mind. You can find us over at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please come by and pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit and stop on by. On this episode, we got a fun one because in honor of Ghostbusters Afterlife, which will be hitting theaters this coming Friday, or actually technically Thursday, the 18th for some advanced screenings, but Ghostbusters Afterlife is coming back to screens, and it's a fun one. It's a fun one where that basically gives it up to a new generation. I don't want to give too much away, but it's think Ghostbusters meets Goonies meets Stranger Things. There's a lot of fun to it. It leans a little bit on the nostalgia, but it's a lot of fun, and I can't wait for you to get to see it. And I think it's definitely sort of going to be the feel-good movie of this movie-going season because, I mean, quite frankly, given what we've all been going through these past 20-odd months, who couldn't use a little bit of feel-good or a bit of a pick-me-up? But on this episode, we had the distinct pleasure of talking with Mr. Bruce Brownstein, who has carved out quite the career for himself as a location manager. He was a location manager on this film and has worked on a ton of different other projects. And we got to talk with him not just about Ghostbusters, but about sort of the business in general, and heard a few war stories from sort of the inside, behind the scenes of what goes into finding locations for so many of these films that we all get to enjoy so very often. But go check out Ghostbusters Afterlife when it hits theaters later on this week. But settle in and enjoy our talk with Bruce right now. It's a good one. All right. Well, Bruce, obviously, first off, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate you being here.
No problem. That was a fun, happy movie. I'm pleased to be able to say all kinds of nice things about it.
Well, and okay, then that kind of dovetails right into my first question because I don't think people understand what the job of a location manager is. I mean, I've got to imagine you're going to be at least somewhat involved creatively with Jason and his team in terms of making sure that the locations are right and the process is right. Like, can you walk me through sort of the early stages of being a location manager?
Yeah, it's it starts with a phone call. I got a phone call from the producer who I worked with before. He says, "Hey, I'm gonna do this thing in Alberta, and do you have anybody out there I could put on it to do some scouting?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I know some guys that I've used before." And I was super busy on another job, and I didn't ask much about it. I said, "When is it going to happen?" He goes, "Well, it'll be next spring, summer-ish, there, that kind of thing." I said, "Okay, here's a couple of guys. They're good scouts. Put them on it." And then a week later, I was thinking, you know what? I should ask more about that because I like working in Alberta. It's always nice to be there. It's beautiful. And so I called them up and I said, "Hey, if in the end that you like Alberta compared to like Oklahoma or New Mexico or wherever you're looking, if you go out to Alberta, give me a call. I'd like to be involved. It sounds interesting." And so I was down in Palm Springs for the winter and I get a call saying, "Hey, Jason wants to meet you. Can you come to Los Angeles and meet him? Because I can't hire anyone in case he doesn't like your face."
Right.
So you got to show your face. So I go to the Sony lot and I meet them, and they're in a funny little office upstairs above the sort of Ghostbusters memorial office space. And we get talking about the movie, and Jason's talking about how he sees the movie, and the production designer is there, and it's like how he sees the movie. And the producer is meanwhile thinking about how he's going to pay for the movie. So it is very creative in how you approach it and how you approach it for everybody's interests. There's no point in picking or showing locations that are not really available and are affordable or make logistical sense. So it took a while for us all to speak the same language. And I think it took a certain amount of them seeing inventory to have a sense of what was there, 150 kilometers outside of Calgary in all directions. So, I hired a bunch of scouts, and we went, and I said, go look for this, go look for that. Like the designer was fixed with the barn. So he said, go find me really cool barns. And so we go looking for barns, but 99% of the time you find a cool barn and everything else around it is terrible. So that doesn't help. And then, so we find a barn, we find a piece of land, and then it comes down to people start talking about elevation. Jason had this idea that he hadn't spoken to before about the relationship of the farm to the road that you would approach it. So now we discover he likes the idea of the farm being elevated up above the road, so that when you look up at it, as opposed to look across the land.
Right.
So now that's different. We're not finding the perfect thing. We found a perfect barn that we could buy and move, but the land it was on was a little too far out to support, and it didn't offer the best sort of view to it from the road. So then we're driving from Turner Valley back to Calgary. Turner Valley is sort of out to the southwest where the gas plant is, where the kids first find Muncher. And they're looking at the rolling hills there, and they're going, this topography kind of speaks to me. And so I said, okay, we'll concentrate in here. We're not going to get like a farm that's a section in big. We'll get probably quarter section, but that might be enough depending on how the lay of the hills is. So we get out there, and within a week, we find this piece of land that's owned by a big sort of ranching conglomerate, and they raise elk and buffalo there.
Oh, wow.
But they also grow ground crops. So we find this piece of land that had been growing barley or something, and we say, what if we put the house up on top of that? Now you've got a really nice dirt road that looks to the house up on the hill. You don't see anything that's annoying or inaccurate off of that hill or on the road leading to it. And so we looked at it. The art department sent up a drone, got an overhead view, made up all kinds of drawings and maps and three-dimensional sort of images of where to place the house. And then it was about a week of walking up this hillside and standing there saying, what if we put the house here? How can we get to it? Where can we put the road? How can we hide all the gear? So we eventually figured out a way to make that piece of property work for the house to look its best and for us to hide our unit on behind the hill and to create an access road that would get us in and out of that house. So, wow. I mean, that's just one piece, but it was constantly on everyone's minds until we found that location. That was key to so much of the movie.
No, for sure.
The small towns and all that, we actually, after they said, okay, we'll hire you, we left California in February and went to Alberta and scouted. And I remember it was like minus 40 up in Drumheller. And it was bitterly cold, and we looked at the small towns. We could see how they could work. We looked at Drumheller, Fort McLeod. I think we looked at Bicycur, Crossfield, every small town. We looked at it and just drove hundreds of kilometers every day until we could see all of the things that we thought were going to be the anchors of the movie. And by the time we left, like a week later, we knew, okay, the whole movie is here. And then we just have to fill in some other locations that I'm sure we'll find. And it is just a process. We probably shot, 50,000 images of everything there, every small town and what it had to offer, until we were able to drill down on what was going to fit the movie. Or we presented, one of the location guys there presented an idea for where you leave the town or the land and you go to the old mine site. You know, we were originally looking for a road and a hole in the mountain and that kind of thing, the traditional. But instead, you know, there's this beautiful bridge that we shot on in a valley that is an old coal mining valley. And he said, you know, what if we just put gates in front of this bridge and said, this is the entrance to the mine? And it was brilliant. And Jason loved it. Everybody loved it. It was like, this is the best fix, and it's the most interesting fix to come up with that location we had yet to find. So, you know, the nice thing about being a location manager is you win. Every now and then you find something you like or that they appreciate or that you can embellish. And when they buy it and say, yes, this is going to be in the movie, it's like the touchdown at the to win the championship every time. It's great.
Well, that feels like the creative sort of rewarding part of the job almost. Because I mean, reality, like you're given a mark on a map. It's like, find me everything or as much as humanly possible as we need in 100-kilometer radius and make it happen.
Yes. Yeah. And it, you know, I've flown into cities that are places that I didn't know that well with that mandate. And, you know, it's kind of frightening, but you just get in a car and start looking, and you go and look and you talk to people. You know, I was in a little cafe in Crossfield. I think we actually shot something in it for this movie. And in the morning at 7 a.m., there'd be like 10 farmers at one table and their wives at another. And if you wanted to know anything about anything, whether it's the land, the farms, the age of the farms, who's got what equipment, who's got anything you're looking for, you go to one of those breakfasts in a small town and you come out knowing everything you ever wanted to know, and you've got a bunch of new friends. It's the best part of the business, is talking to people and discovering these things.
Well, and it's amazing because I mean, I think some of that earnestness came out in the movie too, because I mean, obviously it's such a legacy movie. And I mean, if, you know, the main street had been in Alberta, but the farm had been in Kentucky and the mine had been in Alabama, it would have felt different. You know, it lends to that, you know.
It does. And, you know, like Fort McLeod is very much an American prairies looking town. It doesn't look Canadian whatsoever. And that really helped us in many, many ways. And it's mostly intact for architecture and for period. It was very, very good. And then that gas plant in Turner Valley, it was just so perfect. It was like, you know, it doesn't happen very often on a movie, or it does. It's like that movie where you get to use the cruise ship from the 1940s that's perfect before it gets crushed. Yes, you got to use it. It's in the movie. The good thing about Alberta is that these places, they're there. They're there still, and they'll be there 50 years from now, if we're all lucky. And those little towns, they're so charming. And I think it comes through when you're there. You know, whether it's the public school, which really wasn't a special public school, but there's something about it. Yeah. The fact that it had a gravel parking lot. Jason loved that.
Yeah.
He said, this is a farm town school because they didn't pave the lot. They didn't have the money. It didn't matter. It's a gravel lot. It's funny, after we left there, they did pave it with the money we paid them. But, you know, it had this natural charm about the place. It was amazing.
No, it's amazing when, you know, the only thing you have to worry about is making sure you don't get a Tim Hortons in the shot.
Very much so. And the good thing is, in these small towns, you know, it's a measurement of their success or size, whether they actually get a Tim Hortons.
Right. Now, I'm curious, like when you're taking jobs and doing stuff like this, like, or is it all come down to sort of location and finding towns? Like, because I mean, I can imagine on something like Interstellar where you worked, or Revenant, where I can imagine it gets a bit more challenging and you have to deal with actual topography as opposed to just finding a cute diner.
You know, I've been lucky, and a lot of the movies I've done, it's been about topography, whether it's a forest that we can burn down or where to build the house in Interstellar. You know, I try to pick movies that are going to be interesting. That, you know, on Interstellar, it was all about how are we going to grow corn here? And there was a lot of amazing work done by the scouts, by the people who had originally scouted it with Chris. And we got to do the same thing again on Ghostbusters, because we planted a crop around that farmhouse of corn. And I remember meeting the lady who from Environment Canada, who determines and helps say what particular seeds will grow in what particular ground all over Alberta.
Right.
And she recommended one, and a watering schedule and all that sort of thing. And yep, by the time we shot, we had some really good looking corn around the house. I mean, I love that stuff. It's, in Interstellar, we planted so much corn. We planted corn. It was a quarter section around the farmhouse that got built. And then we had another half section way east of Lethbridge that was our backup corn for driving through in case we needed it. And that corn around the farmhouse was right on the western edge of where you could grow corn without irrigation. And that corn, by the time we were done, it was over 7 feet tall.
Wow.
And it was such a bountiful crop, the farmer had to pay us back the money we paid to plant it.
Now I'm curious, like what got you into sort of this element of the business? Because I mean, I don't think people are going to school to be a location manager.
No, I grew up in construction, and I started working summer construction from the time I was 13. My dad was a builder developer, and I was always around construction sites. And I moved to Vancouver and I saw people filming on the street, and I thought, this looks an awful lot like a construction site. And then I had a friend who rented her house to a director who was going to make a bad Canadian tax movie. And I met him and he said, you should come work for us. We'll find something for you to do. And then I met the guys who were financing it, some venture capitalists, because back then it was the Canadian tax deals on
right.
movie.
Yeah.
And they got talking to me and they said, no, you should come work for us. We'll put you in the office and you'll help push the paperwork through telefilm, and we're going to raise a couple of $1 million. So I kind of learned it in an odd way. And when we actually made the movie called Home is Where the Heart Is, it had Leslie Nielsen in it. It was a terrible movie, but it was a really good experience. And I thought, you know what, I could do this. I could make a living out of this. And so I started as a PA, tried to join the union and chase jobs until I got in. And I lucked out. I got onto MacGyver when it came to Canada. It was in Vancouver. And for 4 years, that was my film school.
Okay.
I learned from amazing producers, directors, guys that had like 1,600 hours of television under their belt by the time they'd show up to shoot an episode of MacGyver. And, the beginning in Vancouver there in the late 80s, you could be anything. You really,
Wild.
If you put in the work and the effort, you could be almost anything. Not necessarily a producer or director, because that was still not
right
easy for Canadians, but I fell into it, and I was good at it because I knew the city like a taxi driver, and it interested me. When I read a script I saw in my mind, I said, that house sounds like it'd be nice as a Cape Cod house.
Right.
And the characters, I would always say to the directors, what cars are parked in the driveway? Who are these people?
Yeah.
And try to get some insight. What's their neighborhood? Does the neighborhood have driveways? Does it have a rear lane? Is it leafy and beautiful? Is it a modern suburb cul-de-sac? How do you feel about these people, and what do you want them to look like?
It
just worked out.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like your job really does sort of encourage like the troubleshooting nature of sort of filmmaking and trying to solve problem solving. And I'm kind of curious, in your experience, like, have there ever been any problems that you've run into that maybe you didn't expect to run into?
Yes. All the time, every week. But some highlights from Ghostbusters. We're in a little town of Bicycle, and we've been looking for the drive-in where the kids hang out.
Right.
And there are beautiful period ones in Calgary along the main strip, 16th Avenue. It's now the Trans-Canada, but they've become isolated in urban sprawl. So you can't shoot off of it. You can shoot a wall and then you go left or right or turn around, and it's terrible. So it had to be something that fit the town. And we looked and we looked and we looked, and we couldn't find anything that was great. And then Jason noticed this garage on a corner in Bicycle that was run down and closed, and it was pretty ugly. And he said, what about that? And so I had this amazing scout who pursued it with the town, said, who owns that? What's going on? And they said, oh, well, there's a tax issue with that property, and that person left town and under some unusual circumstances. But he has a couple of sons that are around. So this guy tracks down the sons, finds out one is a fireman in Calgary and the other one's a farmer, and he pursues them to say, hey, we'd like to use that property. How are we going to do this? And because the dad was hiding in the United States for some reason or other. And it took forever. It took like probably 5 weeks from the time that Jason said, I want to look at that and try to use it, to the point where we actually were able to make a deal. And we're now standing on that property, and we're going to transform it We're going to clean so much crap out of there to make it into something better, and basically redo the inside of it and the outside of it to turn it into our diner. And that was this just amazing amount of persistence to track these people down and make the deal.
Wild.
We ended up paying them whatever taxes were owed on it, so it worked out. Calgary, another Calgary story. MacGyver, the producer, comes back from the holiday and he says, we should go shoot at Heritage Village in Calgary. It's an amazing place. It's beautiful. They got a train, they got saloons, they got all kinds of stuff. We'll do like a dream episode where MacGyver wakes up in a Western. I'm like, that sounds great. So I call up the guy who's the head of the park, and he says, absolutely not. No way. And this is pre like computers and cell phones. And I'm like, well, now what am I going to do? And I couldn't think of who else to call. So I called the premier of Alberta. I got a hold of somebody in his office and I said, listen, I'm this guy. I'm on this TV show in Vancouver, and we'd like to bring the show to Calgary Heritage Village and shoot an episode. And the guy who's in charge said, absolutely not. But I got to reckon that he's not the final say. So do you think you could help me out? And he says, that's amazing. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. So 5 minutes later, he calls back and he says, the place is yours. You can have whatever you want to do there. No problem. We don't want you to pay. Just look after people's times if you engage them. And the guy you spoke to, he won't be there. So,
I love these stories, man. I love them.
I do too. It is amazing. Like the thing about being a location manager, yes, it's great to be creative, but if you can't deliver, there's no point.
Yeah.
And don't overpromise. Set the stage, imagine this, and then let them run with it. If it's a good buy, they're going to buy it and they'll run with it and they'll make it into their idea, and it's going to be great for the movie. It's that's the best part of the job. The other part of the job is always cover your liability with everything you do and keep it as safe as possible, and make sure everybody's informed and knows exactly what's going on. Never give up your responsibility to that location. And for me, what has enabled me to do this job for a long time is when I use your location, I work for you. We're going to make a deal. I'm going to make sure it goes perfectly well because, yes, I represent this film company, but I'm looking after your place.
Yeah.
That makes all the difference. Like fancy houses, mansions, all that kind of stuff. You get word of mouth. If you show up on a door and somebody says, oh, you shot my friend Sally's house. I go, yeah, I did. That was on Wonder. That was such a nice movie. And they're like, come on in, have a look. It makes a difference. You really have to work both sides of the coin. You work for them and you work for the film.
Well, I think you did that and then some with Ghostbusters, because, it is such a delightful film. And, it comes across even just talking to you now. And I love hearing these stories about sort of the unheralded and unsung stories of how films get made, because people often forget it truly makes a village. And thank you for being a part of that village, and thank you for the time today.
I'm happy to tell good stories about movie making, and particularly Ghostbusters. I hope everybody loves that movie.
I think they will. Thanks again for the time, Bruce. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.